Hey folks, this is Tolly and welcome to Let's Do Some More Game Dev. Let's build? Let's game dev? Like, I don't know how to intro these videos anymore. It used to be simple, let's play, because I would just play other games, but now we just build games, and I don't know what the intro is. Anyways, so last time we left off, we had set up some state management system for a bridge over here. This bridge area is missing, and there's a collider preventing us from moving forward. We're going to get rid of this item just so that we don't get any weirdness with our interacts overlapping. We interact with this object on the wall. The bridge moves up, camera moves back. There's some weird little bit of jitter, which I still need to solve, but now the collider's removed and the bridge is operational, and we can continue on. So that was where we left off. The problem, though, is if we get into a battle... Come on. I need to add a radius around them. Whoa! Okay, that's really loud. Let's solve that. That's because we've upgraded. Okay, there. Change that down. Let's pause the background music and see. Okay. Better. I was explaining something. So the problem, though, is when we come out, the bridge sequence plays again, and we see the bridge rise back up, and the camera pan back over to our character, and it feels kind of weird. So we need to solve that. That's kind of the next thing that we need to tackle. I'm thinking that should be relatively straightforward. It'll probably be a lot of similar code, but I think it shouldn't be too bad. The other thing worth noting is we have upgraded to Unity 2021. When we were kind of playing with getting the sequence up and running, I was highlighting at the end of the last stream that I feel like our sequences are just too slow. They were pretty difficult to work with. The reorderable list was getting pretty clunky, and over the past week in the evenings I've been poking at that problem. Haven't had a ton of time, but I've been exploring it. And what I found was that it was kind of, even after I optimized the reorderable list a lot, it was still kind of just causing problems. It seemed like something base to do with reorderable lists. So I went and started investigating a way to replace this system with something else. And that's still in progress, but we kind of have a semi-working like node editor that allows us to like manipulate some of these nodes and see these nodes in a giant list like this. Again, not fully functional. I want to do some more work on this to make it a little bit more readable. Although, while I was working on this, I went back to try and test something, or to kind of reference the original thing that we had, and I found that after we upgraded to 2021, this is significantly smoother. It's still a little laggy, and my computer fans definitely whirl up when I do this, but it's still way better than what we were getting on 2020. So, honestly, the editor may not be necessary, because the problem kind of solved itself just by upgrading to the latest Unity version. Some things with upgrading to the latest Unity version is my mixer sound quality was not the same, which is why we got a burst of audio there at the beginning. And some of the input stuff has changed a little bit, but honestly, it just feels snappier, and I can't really show you that, but I can just say that, like, since upgrading, my input feels way smoother. I feel like I can, like, dodge and move past these guys with a lot more ease. So, upgraded to 2021, kind of just solved a lot of our sequence editor issues. And now that I'm kind of moving past that, again, I might still play with this other like node editor, because it does have its use cases. I have to have one selected in order for it to operate. But it could be good for like inserting objects into these huge lists. Again, I could lay this out differently. This is kind of like a generated version, and I could definitely lay these things out a little bit like in a different way that maybe makes more sense. but the main value would be the ability to insert a step. So if I want to be able to add a reveal sequence step in here, I can add that, drag this into here, and then drag that into there, and I've added it. Opposed to in this one here, if I want to add a sequence step somewhere into here, I have to add it at the bottom, and then I have to drag it up to the position I want. Again, not the worst, but it can be a little bit more tedious. That being said, reordering one object out of the list and moving it to another position in the list is easier in this one. There's debates. Which editor is better might just be that I want both of them for different use cases, but regardless, let's move on to the actual thing I want to work on, which is now that this is kind of, oh shoot. All right, well, unlockable characters with the hydrate has reminded me that I did not grab a bottle of water. I will be right back. Yeah, that's the only thing I can do. All right, I'll be right back. Water retrieved and hydration complete. Okay, so actual problem at hand. So we have the sequence playing, and like I was demonstrating a moment ago, when we go into battle and come out of battle, it replays the whole sequence. So we need something that, instead of replaying the bridge animation, we need kind of to have our sequence system. Again, let's show the bridge animation. What is it doing? It's turning off the player control. It's changing to a different camera, which is positioned to look at the bridge. Excuse me. It has a move for the bridge itself to move the bridge up to a specific position. It has setting the priority of that camera we had turned on back to 0, so that it'll switch back to the player camera. It then deactivates the collider for the bridge, and then it re-enables player control so we can move around again. So we essentially want to be able to get to the end of... Oh, he caught me even though he was really far away. Interesting. There's a bug with the system there. I anticipate with the upgrade to 2021 we might run into some more issues as we stream. I haven't done a full pass on everything, but it hasn't had a ton of problems, so that might just be a base issue with our system. Okay, so if we exit this... Oh, this is actually a really good example too here, because what's going to happen when we are coming back and we were on the bridge-ish? Oh, we weren't quite on it. It looks like it maybe pushed us off. Regardless, we don't want to have this rise up. So we need to build a system for our sequences to essentially fast forward or skip them. So when we load back in here, we know the bridge should be up, but instead of playing this entire sequence out, we should just run through this sequence and just get to the end result without actually going through all of the waiting, essentially. So I think this might involve reworking our core sequence logic. So if we go take a look at, say, move to position sequence step, let's take a look at what this guy's doing. So this is the move to. It's blocking by default. And what does blocking mean? Blocking true. If blocking, start coroutine, otherwise activate instantaneously. So first off, my first thought is we could run a sequence where instead of doing this blocking logic, we're like, oh, we're running this sequence, but we want to run it in fast forward mode, and we say, you know, if not blocking and not fast forward mode, and that would cause it to go in here and invoke. And that would be kind of an okay first step, but it's not gonna work 100%. Primarily because, let's pin this for a second, this is actually doing a do tween movement, and that do tween movement has an amount of seconds that it's taking. That seconds is baked in to this specific move. Interesting. We also are going to run into issues where, say, with the camera system, we're setting the priority, which does an internal set, and priority. This is getting the priority and setting it. I'm not 100% sure if we set this to 0 or to 2 and then back to 0 in the same frame, if it's not going to still have the camera be a little weird. So we need a way to have these things not take time, or potentially not even execute. The thing is that we have a ton of these sequence steps. If we come into here, we can see that we've actually generated a lot of them, and I want to continue to generate a lot of them. My fear is that we're going to have to add specialized logic to every single one of these. So right now there's just the invoke call. We might have to like have an invoke fast forward, which is going to do if we were to do an invoke fast forward, what would that look like? For this specific one, it would basically just be it would look something like that. If we were doing a, like, hey, just skip all the other nonsense and just play this to its end state. Do I want to have... Do I want to have to write a function for every single one of these steps that does its logic? Without any of the waiting. This seems like a bad time. I think this might be the right way to do this. I don't love it, but let's just get it working and see how we feel about it. I can always refactor later. Apply sequence result. I think this is a better explanation of what we're trying to do here, is that we're essentially trying to take a sequence and say, just do everything you need to do and then be done. Just be done. Just move on. Okay, so then the sequence itself normally calls invoke, but we're going to have a special version of this. And so instead of doing an invoke, we're going to do invoke result. Okay. And then instead of checking blocking and doing any of this behavior stuff, I think we just do sequence step, invoke result. And then we wouldn't do any of this wait logic. And then we shouldn't need to have an M is complete. Is this even being used anywhere? What does this get used for? Oh, for screen transitions, we check if something is complete. Okay. Yeah, we shouldn't need that for this result version, so we can just ignore that. And then in the actual sequence steps themselves, which is an interface, we're going to need to create a new function that every single sequence is going to need to define, which is going to be invoke result. Is it results? I think results makes more sense. Okay. And then this thing is going to define a virtual version of that. Okay. I don't think this returns an enumerator. I think it just is. Right, a sequence is a sequence step, which is a little weird, but it's just, it is what it is. Okay. And then we have to pass in the sequence builder into this. Okay. So at its core, that's probably the setup we need to make this work. And then apply sequence results. And then instead of invoking, we're going to do results, and we're not going to do a coroutine. Now, if we go into the interactable states, the dungeon interactable manager in here, this is where we go through each of the states and set them to triggered. And then this gets used here if triggered run sequence. But instead of run sequence, inside of the actual interact when we're loading up the state, we don't want to do this. Apply results only equals to false by default. I hate this. This should be a different function. This is loading it. This doesn't have a return type. This can be an action instead. So what we can do is we can have this take in a... Yeah, I like that more. Instead of doing a bool, we can do a callback, essentially. I can't think of a clever name, so we'll just go with callback. And then the callback is going to need... This action is going to need to be of this type. And we will pass in this as the callback. So when we interact, we'll run loaded sequence. And then for this one, instead, we're going to do a apply sequence results. And this will do this call instead. I copied the wrong function. I did. I need this one. Yeah, that's right. Okay, no more complaints here. And then on initialize, we want to use that one. Oh, accidentally hit select all. All right, so when we initialize, we want to apply sequence results. Otherwise, if we're interacting, we just want to run the sequence. So when we push the button, the sequence plays. If we're loading it from coming in from combat or loading the game, we just want to apply that sequence results. So that should be the setup. We're now going to have a ton of errors with all of these sequence steps because every single one of these sequence steps is now going to be complaining that we're not defining that function. Oh, actually, I guess technically they're not. Because technically they all inherit from a default step, which is defining it, so the interface isn't going to have complaints. All right, so we're going to have to manually go through every single one of our sequence steps, and we're going to have to define what does it look like to apply results. Let's start with move position. So instead of invoke fast forward, I think we're now overriding void I'm unsure whether or not I like the term invoke results or not. It can be renamed later. This doesn't need a return type. Okay, that should work. Next, let's go through basically all the steps that our bridge sequence is operating on, and we should be able to just get them penciled in, and this should start working. I'll still need to go through all of the items, or all of the steps, and add this function and figure out what the logic looks like for each of them. Player controls. So we're going to need player controls. That's under cutscene. This one. So this one is already by default not doing any weighting. It just doesn't have any weight involved. I wonder, could we just instead go back up here? What if we just do by default invoke passing in the sequence builder? And then sequence steps like move to position, which have some built-in seconds that it takes for it to do, they have to define a specific invoke results. But for steps like the set player controls, which are already not doing any weighting, they're just setting a parameter and then returning, they can just do the default behavior. That'll probably save some time. What were the other ones we had? Set camera priority, so that's going to be in here. This has a default wait for camera blend if camera blend is set. So we're going to have to override this one to get around that. So we'll grab this function here. This is going to be a case-by-case basis, which I don't love that. The body cannot be an iterator block because the void is not... Oh, it doesn't like me doing this. Okay, set active has nothing it's really doing, so that's fine. Set internal has 2 wait for end of frames for some reason. Nightmarish. It's probably having to wait for the actual priority being set to get picked up by the Cinemachine camera. So we just don't need that for this version. Different signature. Okay, that should be fine now. So that should be the camera, the player control, move to position we've handled. Set active, I believe we just looked at as well, and that one shouldn't need any special overriding. It's just setting some values, so default behavior should be fine for that. And this is a set active down here. Okay. So that should be enough for us to fast forward a sequence. We're not getting any audio coming through. Did Audio Manager break? It did. Show me in list form. Better. I need to get rid of this interactable or at least move it somewhere else. Okay, so we activate the bridge. Bridge comes up. Good. So let's try and get in a battle near the bridge. Probably this enemy over here is going to be easier to grab. Skip the battle. And we came back with the bridge already set. Cool. So that looked to just work. I don't know if that's my favorite thing I've done in a while. It feels a little icky, but I'm also not 100% sure how to like have this operate without needing like a special function. Like the base functionality this has just doesn't work if we want to try and skip the like do tween movement stuff. The other option is like setting up a bool in here and like having every single one of these have like a am I in fast forward mode, and then when we go to invoke doing special logic. But I think just setting up a separate function is a fairly reasonable approach for this. We'll see what kind of problems it like yields. It's possible long term this will be a problem. Okay. Now, do we want to go through every one of these sequences real quick? We can take a quick look here. Fade audio sequence. This is setting an audio to fade. Given an audio source, try and turn the audio down on it. Interesting. I don't know if we use that anywhere right now. Definitely powerful though. Oh, you know what we must use that for? We must use that for when we're switching audio, like changing tracks, like fading into combat. Where, oh where are all of my sequences? This is the UI ones, bridge crossing. So if we, oh shoot, didn't want to do that. Add audio, fade audio. Yeah, this takes a specific sequence or a specific entity that we want to fade on. How do I find that? Huh. Regardless, that is a blocking call, so that is something that we'd want to skip. So if we were to invoke results, we're going to grab this top section. We're going to do the same thing down here. We're going to get rid of any of the timing. So instead of doing do fade, we're instead going to do dot no. What value would that be? Huh. Volume? Yeah, that makes sense. Took me a second. Destination volume is set. You don't need to worry about any of this other stuff. And that is what the invoke result for this one would look like. Okay. Continuing on. Play sound effect. This one doesn't have any weighting, so it's fine to just have its default behavior. Do the action that has no default behavior. Good. Animation can. Cool. And that should function. Question in Twitch chat, CrackTopCat13 asked the question, how do I feel about analysis paralysis? It's something that I can get lost in for sure in some points, but I try to just get into a mind frame of just like, if I'm stuck, just move on. Like I'm not, like I've been complaining somewhat loudly as we've been doing this that I'm not 100% sure this is the correct approach. I think that having a secondary function that every single one of my sequence steps needs to define on what happens if we're trying to just get the end result and not do any delays inside of the sequence feels off to me. But I can't think of a better solution right now, and it's something that I can like mull on, like I can just keep in the back of my mind if I am ever out for a walk or just like, you know, thinking about other things or like doing other things but have space to think. I can like process this problem and try and figure out if there's a better solution. But for the time being, this gets us moving forward. So I'd rather write bad code that gets us doing stuff that we can later think about and come back to and refactor than to just sit here thinking for hours trying to figure out the like best feeling solution. I think there's merit to both, though. I've definitely known people who are of that latter type and write amazing code and function very well, but I personally just want to see things working most of the time. So what is this one doing? This is a wait for players input. So I think this is just going to be a return. We're not doing anything in here. We're just overriding and skipping the player's move or the player's input if we're trying to just get to the final result here. This is a reveal sequence, which is a pretty complicated sequence, as what it's doing is essentially triggering a active state setting a delay and then activating the next part. For this one, I think it's really just doing the exact same above logic. No, I'm dumb. The end result of this sequence is to just end up in the same state we started with. So if we just skip this one. There's also potentially a argument to be made that I should be commenting some of this stuff, like seeing as we are moving forward with a direction that I don't love, leaving comments behind so that people who come later might think, oh, this is weird, would be a very useful thing to do, except I'm the only person really working on the project. Occasionally there's some sneaky ones hanging out and doing things in spots, but right now anyways, I'm the only one doing code, and so it's not entirely necessary. That being said, it is sometimes useful to leave things behind for yourself. You can definitely get into situations where you really wish you had left comments because you don't know why you wrote code the way you did, especially for like a long-term project like this. This is something we're going to be working on for years, and so there's a possibility that future Tolhi might be upset that I didn't leave comments on some things. Same page, Crack Top Cat. This is here. This is just setting activity and not doing any waiting. That's fine. This is also just transitioning and not waiting. Good. We've already modified that one. We can tell by the little red check marks. This is just setting a follow target and moving on. That's fine. This one already has one. I didn't notice that. This one's doing no waiting, just setting a value and moving on. So we can just have that default invoke and should work fine. This is doing a wait, so we're going to want to get rid of any waits. So instead, we're just going to return. We're not going to do any waiting if we're trying to invoke for results. Just let me add my space. Thank you. Will perform ability. This is something specific to combat, but it looks like we do need to override it to do nothing so that it doesn't delay. This is just setting a state. We can leave that one be. This one's just setting some states. We can leave that be. Same thing here. These all look to be related to camera or to screens and things. That's neat. Didn't realize we have some of these steps. This one is inserting a wait on move, so we're going to need to override that. It's amazing that taking some time away from a problem can yield great results. It's like playing a video game for the first time, and the longer you play, you'll probably plateau in your learning, but if you come back after a sleep, you perform better without having to think about it. Definitely. That is 100%, I think, the type of thing I'm talking about. So then here we're going to invoke result. Technically would be better if we didn't create this step. It's like slightly better. The newing in here could be optimized out. Like we don't really have to new us. Well, I guess we do. I'm moving on. What's this guy doing? Oh, this is just setting a variable. This one's adding a wait. This is wait on move sequence step. Yeah, we're just going to want to ignore this one completely. I'm adding a return in here, which I think is wholly unnecessary. We just need to define an empty function. I might go back and fix that here in a second. Advanced dialogue. This is doing nothing. This is also doing nothing. This has a built-in wait. I wonder if for some of these complex states, the other solution here would to be instead of overriding this base one is if we just override the wait, which we're about to do as we move down the list, we would kind of defeat the need to modify this one, because this would do nothing on invoke, but... Oh, we do and we don't, though. Whatever. We're down the road. Why are you... Oh, because I didn't get rid of the yield return. Yeah, I don't think we need to be modifying these complex ones. Same thing here, because if we modify this base one, we wouldn't need to modify the top level. Yeah, because the moment we come in here and we just make this an empty function, there's no longer any weighting in these top ones. Interesting. Okay. Almost done now. The copy and paste fest is nearly complete. And then we have some decisions to make, chat. This one doesn't need an override. It's not doing anything complicated. This is a fade. That's definitely going to need an override. So, grab this. Paste this in here. Replace this tween with a simple alpha is equal to not start alpha, but end alpha. We also don't need to worry about setting the default value because we're going to just be immediately setting it to the end result. Don't need to modify the speed. Good. So the next thing I'd like to think about, well, there's two paths. This fast forwarding is necessary for us to start building puzzles in the game. Interesting. Huh. Sorry, I will get to what we're moving on to in a moment, I guess, because we're still running into interesting cases. So this is a spot where we're trying to set a sprite. And we're going to be setting that sprite by its addressable ID. And this addressable is not an instantaneous call. We have to load the asset asynchronously. So we do have to wait for it to be done before we can set the result. This just won't be instantaneous. It can't be, by its very nature. We need to set up a callback similar to here. That is the great thing about as the project becomes more advanced, I can just find other chunks of code where I've done a thing. It like greatly accelerates the time. Okay. So that's how we'll solve this one. The image will get set when it gets set, but we're not waiting or delaying on it, which is the best we can hope for on this particular problem. Set text. That doesn't have any weighting in it, nothing to override. This one has built-in weight. We're gonna have to override that. And the main thing here is the sequences, the do tweens, because the tweens are gonna have built-in time that they're gonna try and run, and we don't want to do that. So anchor position is equal to end position. Okay. And then technically we can save a little bit of memory by not doing an allocation. Small, but good. Yeah, that seems fine. Lots of UI translation steps. That makes sense. We do a lot of movement of elements as we switch between scenes in our front end. This one's pretty complicated. Gonna get rid of the wait for seconds, gonna get rid of the delay, going to do the anchor position is equal to end position, left a comma, need to fix that. We don't need to set it to the start value because we're going to be setting it immediately to the end value. We don't need to do any of this. and we can get rid of the actual do tween itself. Okay. So this is mostly a huge bulk step because we're having to go back and retrofit every single one of our existing sequence steps. Moving forward, each new sequence step we build, we'll just have to have a slightly extra step here of setting up what its invoke results look like. This is setting the scale. That's going to be local scale is equal to end scale. Remove this. Don't need to worry about setting the start values. This is technically wrong. If this is kind of a problem in the base version of this, but this should more be written as if entity is equal to null return. No, it's not. I'm being dumb. This is for some different reasons. Okay, it's been a while since I've been in this code. Cool, copy and paste this. Moving on. Don't touch the things. The things are written a very specific way for a reason. This is doing a bunch of setting, but it doesn't look like it has any weight built in, so nothing to override there. Same thing here. This is doing a bunch of really complicated alignment logic, but it doesn't need to be modified in any way. And we're outside of the sequence steps. Okay, last thing I want to do is very quickly go through all the red checkmark ones that we modified, and any of them where I just set a return of nothing, we're just going to get rid of the return because it's unnecessary. That was me somewhat copy and pasting and not thinking about what I was doing. It's fine. This is all overriding, getting rid of the return. Getting rid of the return. Okay. Now we are ready to start talking about what we're working on next, and that's the last one. Cool. So let's see if there's any errors. It doesn't look like there's any issues. Let's validate things are still working. Okay, bridge is up. Interesting. There's something bugged with the way that they chase us. Okay, that's something I'm going to need to dig into. And the state is set correctly. We're going to validate against other sequences to make sure we haven't messed any up. We're still able to collect this potion. And let's quickly go check the cutscene, which is in here. Jailbreak 3D cutscene. Let's validate we haven't broken anything in this area. I wouldn't expect us to have, because we're still doing a normal invoke here, not a fast forward, or apply results. So that should still operate perfectly the same. The problem would be if we tried to like skip this, like if we hit like start to skip, we'd actually, so that's a more difficult problem. We've kind of partly resolved it, but if we were to try and skip a cutscene while mid-run, we'd actually need to run some slightly different code. Because at this point, the sequence system would be in the invoke run logic, which is a completely different function. See, this is why we think about things. This is why we build it and then we think about it. So the one problem with doing it this way is going to be that we're going to run into issues where if we're already in the invoke, we can't really cause us to skip because we're in the invoke version. There's no way to get over to the invoke results. I guess the way that we could do that is if we detect a skip, we figure out what step we're currently on, we save out all of the sequence steps that we had left remaining. So like, hey, if blocking, do this, else do this. If we're, skip has been pressed, then, or maybe at the top of the function, if skip has been pressed, set sequence step I to be added to a list of skippables, and then continue, and then just do that over and over, skipping all of this logic. And at the end, just do invoke results. That would probably actually work. Interesting. Okay, we don't need to implement that right now, but this is still solvable if we wanted to do a skip. And the reason we want to do a skip specifically is that if there was something in this cutscene where a character gave you leather armor or a sword, or gave you some sort of perk or bonus, and it was happening in the cutscene itself, we want to make sure that we give you that reward and not miss it by just like moving on to the next scene, for example. Okay, cool. So this all seems functional. We have skipping, which allows us to start creating puzzles and not have to worry about the sequence playing every time that we come back to the dungeon. So we've got a couple directions that we can go in. We can either work on level design and starting to build more levels. This is kind of a rough pass at a level that I have working for, like, I think the middle section of the dungeon. This feels right, but like section A is still just penciled in as just like a linear path. This I would want to be more elaborate. So there's like a level design problem. There's also, so the next big problem, which I think is actually what I want to start digging into. Okay, first let's talk about sequences. There's one other thing that we still might want to do on sequence side. In the actual bridge system, when we actually activate this bridge and bring it up, we might want to be able to reverse sequences. Right now we have the ability to play them. We just created a way to skip them. Now we need a way to reverse them. So if I come over here and hit this button again, really, I would really like to see this play the opposite of what it did. And that's another problem to solve. And so that's number 2. So number 1 is working on some level design. Number 2 is working on some reversible logic for the sequences, which is an extension of what we just spent some time doing, kind of in the same vein. And then, or same avenue, same road, same path. The third option is we need to look at combat. Combat hasn't been tuned. Combat isn't necessarily fun or interesting. We have all the pieces of combat put together in that, like, we can get into a battle. The battle starts, characters take turns hitting each other, and there are skills that you can perform, but like, it's not fun or interesting. And that's a pretty big problem that we need to solve. Couple comments in chat. Let me take a quick catch up here. Just a disclaimer, I'm not a programmer, says Topcat. Are you worried about making changes and not testing between changes? I get you can go back and troubleshoot and fix issues, but I get that some debugging will identify errors. Your thoughts? So, as a general rule, I agree that you should be checking and testing as much as possible, but I've also been doing this long enough, and this is going to be an arrogant opinion, but I've been doing this long enough that I know how many changes I can make over like a 45-minute or an hour, and I have it all in my head. I know every change I've made, and I know every problem that might be arising from that, and for the most part, when I hit play, it just works because I know what I've written. Earlier in my career, it was definitely true that I would write a bunch of code and then everything would be broken because I just wrote a lot of problems into it. That doesn't happen as much anymore. I'm sure if you comb through the last few streams, you could find a lot of examples of me doing exactly that. But for the most part, I feel like when we spend 45 minutes to 2 hours writing code and then testing it at the end, usually it's like, oh, I didn't save a file, or I'm a variable was misnamed or something like very small that the console tells me about, and I resolve immediately. There's a question about whether or not level design can come last, which is fair shout. It is something that I do need to do at some point, though. There's kind of this concept in game development of like waterfall, or like who an easy way to say it is who are you blocking. If I'm not gray boxing out the levels and the gray boxes for the levels aren't complete, that means that a artist will be blocked from building up a finalized version of the environment. So there is a concern about like, hey, if I don't finish doing all the level design, then Drixie can't come in and do all of the actual like making a final version of the environment. Or that might be me too. We're still not sure on timelines. I might do some of the environment stuff because Drixie's a bit bogged down in some of the character development things, and there's a lot of work still to be done there. I mean, we're going to take 10 years building this thing, but bite-sized pieces. There's a lot of work in the short term on the art side. So there is the potential of blocking. It's probably not likely that I am blocking, so I don't really have to do the level design to get like art moving. The other half of wanting to do level design early is more just getting a space that I can play through, especially as we want to do some of those later things. Having an environment and having a picture in my head of what the environment feels like helps me personally design other parts of the game, because it just completes more of the puzzle. Like if you think about it like a traditional like jigsaw puzzle, it's like I'm slowly building in all the pieces. I have in my mind's eye what I want to build, but it's not always super clear. And so finishing up building up the dungeon and the level design can help concrete some concepts and find problems that I still need to solve on the code side. If that makes sense. So level design could probably come last, but level design could also come first. It all depends on the individual's priorities. Unlockable character saying level design, I love the level design of Octopath. There are torches along only the main path of the dungeon, so no unwanted backtracking. I know it's not for everyone though, and that's fair. That there is a lot of like level design like smartness you can do with tracking. I loved The Division had a lot of tarps everywhere, with the just blue tarps anywhere you could climb, and like that visual language became very intuitive and clear, and I really enjoy a lot of that as well. There's also a hydrate request. Top Cat also says combat should be saved until last. I mean, there's other stuff that kind of higher priority, right? So yes and no. And then I'm going to read your other comment as well, which is it does all make sense. Just giving my opinion on how you might make a bunch of level design and not end up using it. If you're just making test and play environments, I totally understand why you'd want to make some of those, for sure. I think I'm going to stand up for the stretch request. Untangle the mic cable. So at its core, right, what we're really doing here is the whole thing is still playtesting, right? We don't have like a complete demo that's really like playable, and we're getting scarily close. I don't know if you've been following along for the past little while here, but like, oh, what's this? Oh, neat. I don't even know how I activated that. Sorry, but if we think about the last few weekends, we've been kind of just polishing it up and getting everything working in 3D. My hope is that we can get to a point where that cutscene we were just seeing with the jailbreak is the first section. You play through that, you get to a section of the dungeon, you move through that environment of the dungeon, getting into battles. As you get into those battles, you get into You get experience, you gain that experience, you go into each of the characters, you progress along each of those characters like node trees, gaining new stats and skills. You then go into the other skills that you gain, progress down through those skill trees, unlocking more stats, more abilities, more passive type stuff, and just like start playing through the actual ability progression. Meanwhile, still continuing through the dungeon, getting into battles with enemies, continuing to gain more experience, getting more items, changing up your equipment, getting in a few more cutscenes, narrative, dialogue, eventually ending in a boss battle. I think that's what we've been building towards for like 2.5 years now. It's all been bite-sized pieces. Like we built towards combat first, got combat functional. Then we built towards getting a dungeon figured out, and we kind of had that working. And then we built towards having menus and UI, and that took us like 6 months to a year to get all the UI stuff fully functional. And then after we had all of that working, we spent some time kind of refining and getting cutscene systems working, and then finally moved into converting from 2D to 3D, just because 2D was causing so many headaches, and there's just a lot more that we can do with 3D space. It was a huge learning hurdle, but I think in the long run it'll allow us to do more easily. It's one of those paying it early. And then finally we're getting to a point where all of those systems that I had mentioned before are all converted over to 3D, and we're finally getting close to being able to see the whole picture and get an idea of, you know, does this all fit together the way that I think it's going to? All right, stretch complete. Okay, a couple more comments. Let's get some actual action on the screen as I'm reading through this, though. So I'm probably not understanding what you're going for yet. I was looking at it like setting goals for finishing a product. These goals seem really reasonable for setting up the foundation for the real thing. Yeah, and I think that's the idea, is we're trying to get to a vertical slice of just a dungeon. Can we play through one dungeon, and what does playing through one dungeon look like? And then we can build 40 more dungeons, and we can build the next, honestly, the next step after the dungeons is towns. I want to do probably a year of development on just like, you know, how do we get NPCs, and those NPCs, do they wander around? Do they do things? Do they like walk from market and back to market, and dialogue trees? And then we have to get into like cutscene kind of movements through those things. There's a bunch of stuff to be solved on towns after we finish dungeons. And then once we've done towns, I think then we're into maybe production where we're like just putting pieces together, building up that narrative, building up those towns, building up the dungeons, allowing you to explore through spaces, etc., etc. Unlockable characters says, I had argued the combat system should be one of the first things, since combat is one of the foundations of the game. It needs to be fun, not an obstacle. I think if combat design isn't a priority, it's easy for it to become an obstacle. That's fair. So I think we built up this kind of combat system first. It was one of the first things we built, but I really felt like the combat system wasn't interesting or fun. And it was partly because I realized that when I play a lot of traditional Final Fantasy games, which is a very heavy inspiration for me, and like those old JRPGs, and even like Final Fantasy X, something more middle of the realm, like those tend to have battles where you kill the guys in 1 to 2 hits. You hit them twice, they die, you take very little damage, and it's not really about the individual battles as much as it is about the progression and, to be honest, the attrition of your party. How far can I get without having to heal, I think, is a big question for me. I think this is very highlighted in like Persona 5 even. Persona 5 is very much how much of the dungeon can I get done in one day? Because you want to try and get through the whole dungeon in one day, so you don't have to spend multiple of days, you know, going back and backtracking through the dungeon, so that you get to spend as much time ranking up your friends in Persona 5 as you possibly can. And that's because of the whole time-based system that game has on top of it. But I think that's true in general, that in most situations, the in most dungeon-based JRPGs, the combat system is often very trivial and tends to be an ooh piece of candy moment where you finish them very quickly, you get your skill ups. Your skill ups let you go invest in your character. Not ooh bug. I cannot open the front end after coming back from combat. Okay, cool. That's something to figure out. And so although I had built the combat first, I really do kind of feel like I need to build all of the pieces together to really get an idea of whether or not things are working. So is there any kind of plans for some sort of dynamic AI kind of dungeon master that adapts to how the player plays? Probably not. Again, the inspiration is much more traditional in that, like, if you look at a like Final Fantasy like 10, for example, it's more linear progression. You move through the environment, you get story beats, you gain a bit more investment in what's going on in the world, you gain some skill points, some progression, and you continue to move through boss battles, more story, boss battles, more story, and through the zones. And just exploring the environment is part of the appeal. But that game runs on a random encounter system. The only major difference I have is that, like, unlike most traditional Final Fantasies, I'm trying to do something with like enemies being the trigger for battle, which is something more of like Lunar. Lunar is one of the references I'm looking at for that. So like for the most part, the dungeons will be pretty static, with the enemies mostly just doing their own thing, patrolling their little paths, and it's more about how they, like, you know, stack on top of each other and interact more so than anything else. So if we skip this battle, interesting. So I have a little piece of like a white box right now, which is pretty awful, but it appears in the bottom right corner. That white box isn't there, and that white box represents the HUD. Essentially, if I was to have like a mini map or something, this white box is supposed to represent that. So when we go into battle and we come back, we don't actually enter back into the HUD state. And if we're not in the HUD state, we can't enter into the menus. That makes sense. Cracktop Cat says, personally, I feel like the most rewarding battles would be close fought. I just barely could win. And that's 100% fair too, but I find those games tend to not be as much dungeon based. Or, okay, there's two veins to that idea. There's either you have Final Fantasy Tactics and Ogre Tactics. What was the other one? I'm more familiar with Final Fantasy Tactics. Yeah, Tactics Ogre is the other one. Those games tend to be really interesting because they're tile-based movement kind of TRPGs, tactical RPGs. Thank you, Tactics Ogre. But yeah, those games tend to be they tend to be map-based. So if we look at Tactics Ogre and we take a look at their maps, they tend to be these large and like expansive areas that take you like 20 to 30 minutes to get through one battle. XCOM is another really great example of that. XCOM, it's not about the exploration of like a dungeon, it is about getting through one battle, and that one battle might take you 30 minutes to 45 minutes to get through that one battle. But if we think about like JRPGs, like they tend to, like, again, you could think this is a JRPG too, but this tends to have these kind of this type of system. But if we think of something like Final Fantasy VI, Final Fantasy X, like those games tend to not have long expansive battles. They tend to have very small intermittent battles that break up the dungeon, but the dungeon will usually take you about the same amount of time that one battle in XCOM or Tactics Ogre might take you. So you tend to spend more time in those games doing the dungeon exploration, and the dungeon is how I think of the whole battle in like XCOM. They're catching me when they're not supposed to catch me too. I want to take a note of a couple of things here. Okay, creating a couple bugs. XCOM is similar, but if you, it's a more so luck-based tactical RPG rather than a skill-based tactical RPG. Same map point though. Yeah, that's fair. It's a fair distinction as well. I think from the point I'm trying to make, they're very similar in that like the individual fights are very close and difficult because the whole fight is the whole thing. Yeah, exactly. Cracked top cat. I get that. Long fought battles that take thought, and you feel rewarded because of the amount of thought and effort you put into them. Whereas I think that a lot of the older kind of random encounter dungeon based exploration crawling games like Final Fantasy tend to be a little bit more like, again, ooh, piece of candy. Each battle is more of a small thing that you kind of get in and out of very quickly, but they're not always that difficult, except the boss battles. Once you get to the end of like an actual like huge part of a dungeon, you usually get to a boss, and that boss tends to be a bit more like 10-15 minutes, a little bit more difficult, a little bit more challenging, has a bit more of a complicated battle, similar to again, I think this is something that's represented in Octopath, was mentioned above. Octopath Traveler has a similar thing where a lot of their battles tend to be fairly straightforward. There is a strategy to them, don't get me wrong, there is something, an optimal play and some thought to be put into them, in that how you choose to fight does matter, but the actual the actual like boss battles are significantly different in the scale of strategy you have to put into them than the random individual encounters. I also said there's two options. I said that if you want to have interesting battles, you can either have them be the whole experience and you don't have the dungeon crawl. The other, so that like it's 45 minutes to play one battle. The other option is you can do a dungeon crawl, but you can reset your character's health every time. So every time you get into a battle, you reset the stats of your characters such that they go back up to full health every single battle you go into. That way, there's never any risk of attrition in any battle. It's not about healing in between those battles and seeing how much health, if you have enough healing items and enough health and mana to get through the whole experience of the dungeon. It's more about each battle individually being a test of skill. That's another way that you can do more elaborate kind of combat in a dungeon exploration, is you make them a little bit more difficult, but you don't have the constant needing to heal outside of battle. It's like slightly different. Again, these are things that I might be wrong on too. I'm also just I'm just talking about a lot of things I've thought about for the past 2.5 years, and this is where I've come to conclusions on how I want to build things. But again, we don't have a fully playable prototype, so it's also possible that I might find that these assumptions I've made are incorrect as well. I do want to give that caveat. Okay, so why are we not in the HUD? That was a fantastic talk though, guys. I really, folks, I really appreciate it. I enjoy chatting. So we're going to take a small detour and just see if we can figure out why the HUD components aren't displaying. Okay, so yeah, this white square hasn't, so this white box here is our HUD essentially. It renders out here in space essentially, but normally you can't see it. It's just how I do things. But it's not on. So something is amiss when we come back from combat. Where would the problem be? Global managers, screen controller. What screen are we currently in? Last open screen was skill screen unit select. Interesting. Can we go into a debug mode? Can we get more information than that? Not especially. So we never transitioned to the HUD. Let's see where we're supposed to do that. I believe that's in the transition manager. Transition between scenes. Okay. So this is the call. This gets called from 6 places. The on load of the game, that makes sense. On boot screen, so when we load into the game for the very first time. When we are entering into combat. When we're transitioning between scenes. And then there's a step for transitioning. That we have a sequence step for transitioning. Bravely Default is something that I have not played. I've played Octopath, which to my understanding is similar, but I have not played the Bravely Default games. My understanding is that that is it was a landmark point where like JRPGs of the past kind of were brought into like more of a modern light, and it is something on my list I'd like to get to, but it's weird. I don't want to play something that I haven't played because I'm afraid of it influencing too much of my design. I prefer to try and get what concepts I have concrete before I start looking elsewhere. And that's a weird statement, but it's a mindset I have for some reason. Like, I don't mind referencing like old Final Fantasy games because those are like just part of my psyche. There's nothing I can do about that. But the Bravely Default is something that I have on the back burner that I want to play, but I want to get a little further into my own project, so I've concreted my own designs before kind of looking at that. Although, to be honest, most of my designs are pretty concrete at this point. Where does this come from? Let's transition to game over. Oh, interesting. Okay, so on combat victory screen complete on process input, we should be transitioning to last scene, and last scene should be sending us to the HUD as the next target. Okay. And if we go take a look at our rudimentary graph for showing all of the nodes, it looks like combat victory results screen should be taking us through. Oh, I didn't mean to. Oh no. Don't do whatever you're trying to do. That thing is still a little bit weird, but it should be going in here and then into the HUD. Okay. Okay, so that all looks fine too. So let's put a breakpoint in here and see if we're actually hitting this call. I think we are, because this is the sequence that actually causes all the UI to appear when we get into combat. And let's see if we can figure this out. We never did really answer my question, though. We got a bit on tangent about what thing I want to work on. We found this bug that I'm going to kind of poke at here for a few moments, but... And we also have the other bug, which I want to write down, because I don't think I'm going to get to right now, because it's going to be a bit of a bigger problem, but the enemies are triggering battles when nowhere near the player. That is a dungeon issue. I'm going to tag that correctly, and I'm going to assign that to myself to keep track of. I like having a task control system. It's really important for me to like maintain and keep track of what I'm working on, because there are times where I'm like, I don't know what to work on next. There's an infinite number of things that I can work on, from art to UI to level, like what I was talking about. There's a ton of different things, but just having a task control system allows me to better like see my options right now. I don't need this breakpoint, and I don't need this breakpoint. We've got some old breakpoints still hidden amongst things. Okay, let's get into battle. Okay, don't care about that. Don't care about that. And don't care about that. Cool. Skipping the battle. I'm hitting A to move forward. Transition to last scene. Okay. I want to validate we don't... I want to make sure we don't skip over that. So we're going to just put a breakpoint here. Okay, transitioning to last scene. Load async is going to be trying to go into... Hit the wrong button. Let's breakpoint here. So we're leaving combat. Oh, it skipped. Okay, so then screen controller switches to scene transition controller. And as long as target screen is not equal to nothing, then it should be getting us back. Okay. Interesting. I can get into the UI after a battle. Oh, is this problem more simple than I think it is? Node-based editor. We normally come into the HUD from a couple different options. Switch it back to normal mode. On open HUD. On close. Oh no, this all looks correct too. This should be playing translating the HUD in and then giving control to the player. Super weird. Okay, we're gonna go back into breakpoint and see what's happening here when we actually swap. I feel like we are in the HUD scene. I think it's just the UI isn't moving onto screen correctly. Okay, this is fine. We're loading. Loading into combat. Because I feel like nothing would be working if we weren't switching back to the HUD correctly. Let's hit A. That's brought up here. Okay, in here, in here. Target screen is HUD. Okay, so we're swapping. I don't want to go into here. I want to go into this function. Okay, swapping screens. Going into the HUD. Updating. Previous selection was null. Okay, that's fine. New screen is HUD. We're popping one thing off the stack, which is going to be the transition, which is basically the fade to black. That makes sense. It's not an overlay, so we're closing the transition screen. Yep, that makes sense. And current selection is null still. Again, these are all fine problems, or fine. We're opening the HUD. Okay. And then we're going to add a transition. And the transition is going to be from the transition to the HUD. Okay, that all looks fine. It's creating a combined value. And then it's going to go find the sequence steps for that. Checking each of these, looking for a set of sequence steps that match. And it's adding those to the queue. Okay, so the steps it's adding to the queue is a fade, a set active, a translate, a set active, a translate, and a set control. I know from where we were just looking, these bottom four are the steps for the HUD. So the HUD should be playing then. So let's take a look at the queue. So inside of update sequence, we check to make sure the queue is not 0. So if we come back into here, we should get in here. We are starting a sequence with the screen transition that we have in the queue. That's going to come into here. And that's invoking the sequence steps. And these are the 6 steps that we would expect as we enter into the HUD. Interesting. It's too hard to use that thing to find transitions. I want to find this one. Yep, got it. And then can we just select this? I'd like to see... Oh, it's here. Okay, this one here. So we are at some lower value. Huh. I think that this is doing something incorrectly. And this translate vector is probably the root problem. Yeah, because it's turning it on. What's the close look like? That's the question. When we... If we get into combat... Yeah, I really need to add like a radius around them that they notice you, because you can get too close, I feel like, right now with them spotting you. Or more accurately, you can touch them without a battle starting, and I feel like that should be like another piece of logic. Okay, so we're transitioning into combat. That's all fine. Yep, fantastic. So the HUD is missing. Gonna get rid of some of these breakpoints for a second. Yes. Okay, so if we were to toggle this on, when we transitioned into combat, we actually moved it down and to the right, but we moved it all the way down here. And I just don't think we're moving it back up far enough. So if we go back and look at the... in here, HUD, when we exit and close the HUD, we're closing from cutscene, and that's translating it down. And then when we come back in, we translate it down again, and then we translate it up. Okay. I see what the problem is. There's some weirdness with the way that we handle our transitions. And it really comes down to this root problem of translation. Okay, this isn't something that I can solve right now, but it's something I'm going to put on the back burner. HUD does not return to main screen after combat. It's a bug. It's a problem with our dungeon. It's also technically a UI problem, and I'll assign that to myself. Cool. Now, what do we do now? Okay, so all of the options are valid. I think the long speech I gave at the beginning here, I think should make that clear. Whether I choose to do level design or I choose to work on combat, or even if I choose to continue working on like sequences and like refining and making rewindable ones so that I can create more dungeon puzzles. Like all of these things are valid options for me to work on. They all have to get done in order for me to validate that the game is interesting. I think the battle I want to choose to fight right now though is the combat system. So yeah, I want to dig into combat. So how is combat currently working? Let's go into the combat scene directly as we start talking about this. So what does it currently do? Well, it currently functions in that like I can perform actions and I can take damage. The way that that currently works is I am currently in a state where there's a combat state machine, and that state machine is actually pretty simple. It has an init, an intro, and that basically just keeps going over and over through wait for ability state and play ability. So if we're in the wait for ability in here, it basically just has an update where it checks to see if the ability sequence manager has a sequence that's been granted. This can come from both the enemy AI or this can come from the player. Those are the two people who can add a primary sequence. And once a primary sequence has been added, it will then trigger it to go into the play and wait state. And the play and wait state essentially figures out, who is the attacker, who is the target, and it'll then build a sequence to, essentially show them fighting. And then somewhere in here, we have a will perform, which checks whether or not we can perform. I think it's actually waiting to see if we were in a good spot. And then there's a sequence complete, and on sequence complete, that checks to see if we won or lost and whether or not to go to the complete state. Otherwise, we go back to waiting. And if there's no remaining sequences, aka there aren't multiple sequences queued up to activate, then we go back and we say it's now the end of that unit's turn, select the next unit to go. So this is all working. It is important to note the perform. Where is the... There is somewhere in this sequence which handles the actual stat modification. Here, this one. So this resolve gets set when we choose an ability and we perform that ability on the stored targets, basically. And this perform is going in and actually going through all of the pieces of the ability and performing it on all the targets we pass in. Right now we can only choose one target because of the limitations of our UI, but we could pass in multiples. And then when we perform the ability, we're actually coming into here and grabbing all the different effect types that we have. And then for each of those effects, we then try and roll to hit if there's a % chance to hit on that object. And then we do an apply of the effect, which is pretty much nothing in like the base, but there's a bunch of different types of ability effects we can do. In order to figure out the tuning of this system, there's a bunch of things we need to solve. The first and the foremost is how much damage do we do with an attack? So when I perform this attack right now, it does 26 damage. Why 26? There's a formula somewhere. And that formula, if we take a look at the damage, or is it simple? It might be simple damage that everything's using right now. It basically gets the attack stat of the attacker, the defense stat, it gets the power ability of the actual attack we're doing, and then it looks like it just sets damage to be equal to power. Okay, that's the simple version. Okay, we're not using simple version then. We are using this one. This is what we're currently using. This is the attack value of the attacker times the attack value divided by the attack plus the defense value equals damage. And we make sure that that value is at least 1. That's what this is doing. Choose the higher value, damage or 1. And if 1 is higher, then we choose 1. So you can never do less than 1 is really the point of this. So Oh, and then we have a power stat, which we get, and then we times the power stat by the damage divided by 10. And that gives us the actual damage. And once again, we make sure it's never less than 1. And then we also do a damage tweak formula in which things can listen to this. Currently, nothing listens to it, but we could have something that could tweak the damage after we've done all of this. So we could have a weapon that does ×2 damage on every hit or something. And then that damage value, after getting tweaked, gets clamped between min and max. Our max being 99, our min being -99, and then we do that much damage negative. So we're minusing it so that it'll be a negative value. If you did 99 plus, then we're going to subtract that amount from the enemy's health. If it was a negative value, then we're going to be actually adding. So I don't know if I love this damage calculation. This is some formula that I found somewhere that was like fairly reasonable for testing purposes, but I don't know if I love it, and I don't know if I love the way that it's going to scale. With our current stat values, it feels okay to me. Like we do 21, that seems fine. They do 21, that seems fine. If I do my special skill and do Shadow Slash, that one's doing 23. It did 2 more points than a normal attack. Is that good? I don't know. And like, what if I go into my stat tree system? We have all those stats nodes that we can upgrade in the UI. What if I give myself a bunch more stats? What does that number become? 100? 150? 400? I don't know. Depends on the defense of my enemy. There's a bunch of these questions that I need to solve. And from my experience with working on design things, you can hand tune this stuff. I have designed hand tuned problems like this in my career, and it's awful. What does hand tuning mean is a question I should answer. Hand tuning is me coming in here and modifying the defense and the attack of each of my characters, and potentially even modifying how we calculate the damage, and like modifying the power of the abilities, slowly tweaking every single one of those numbers until I found numbers and attack values that I think are fun, interesting, and good. You can create something that feels really solid from doing that, but if you modify anything in that equation, oh, you know what, when you get to level, like when you've unlocked 5 or 6 skills and completed all of their skill trees and gained all the stat increases from those, which is equivalent to saying you got to level 50. Let's say that's maybe easier to understand. The numbers completely break. Well, now I have to tweak something in the numbers, but that might change the base numbers. But I spent all that time tweaking the attack and the defense. Now everything's broken because I didn't tune for level 50. And that hand tuning process of changing these numbers manually and playing it constantly to try and see if every small tweak I made feels better or worse is how you will end up pulling your hair out. It is super rewarding, but also really difficult for long, like stat-based games like JRPGs. The natural progression is I need something that will give me this information rapidly. I need a simulator. I need something that will simulate the battle for me, and it will tell me what was the average damage done, what was the highest damage done, what was the lowest damage done. It will need to tell me how many hits can a character take before they die from that. It should also tell me if I run the simulator over 1,000 battles, how many battles can the characters go before they need to heal or before the entire party wipes. I want to get that data through something that just spits it out into a like console form and gives me like a handful of really important answered questions. And I want to be able to put in different damage formulas, aka adjust this damage block, and I want to be able to adjust the attack and the defense and the power of my abilities, and have that simulator just spit out information that is much more digestible to me. That's what I want to do. But my system was not built with that in mind. So when we go back in and we look at this system that I just walked us through, in which we wait for an ability and then we apply it, the actual ability system where we have the apply logic here, right here, when we perform the ability, we go through all of the base effects and we roll to hit on all of them, and then we do some calculations inside of this apply, depending on all the effects. It's doing a bunch of stuff that would be really hard for a simulator in terms of calculations. Let's come up to an actual attack. So if we open this, we can see that this attack has 3 ability effects that it has. It has the attack, which has a power level of 40. It has a particle effect that it will apply. It has a damage effect, and it has an audio effect. If I was to try and simulate, it's going to try and do each of these things. And even worse, if we look at the combat states and we take a look at the play and wait, this thing has a bunch of delays built into it. That's essentially like doing all of the tinting of the characters and all of the actual like information being shown. So if I perform this attack, the character tints, we show attack above them, this character gets tinted, and then it says the damage text. If we're going to simulate 1,000 battles, we don't want to have this visually showing any of this information. We just want it to calculate and just go through that process. We also need to have a system in which the AI drives the player character as well. And that may not need to be, we might want a different set of AIs that more closely simulate what we think a player should be doing. Like ideally, I would want a player to be, choosing the best ability and the best skills. So I might want to use Shadow Bolt when I have the mana to do so. I might want to switch to Fala if Fala was alive and use her Shadow ability when I have Shadow Magic to consume. So we not only do we need to adapt our existing combat system to be simulatable, aka be run without all of the additional weights and timings on it, we also need to build an AI system for all of our characters, so that we can have something that closely resembles how we would expect a player to play. Because otherwise, if we're just choosing abilities randomly, like that's not going to yield information that would be comparable to an actual person playing. A couple questions. Unlockable character says attack times attack divided by attack plus defense. So I'm assuming the float is a random number, but why does defense add to attack damage? Does the formula not take into account the skill power, and with 3 attacks with scaling, won't attacks be more important than defense? Probably. Like, it basically is bringing the attack value down. But yeah, the attack value will be more important than defense is probably an accurate statement. I don't know what all the impacts are. Again, I'm not entirely sure where I found that formula. Again, we've been working on this for a long time. I may have found that on a forum or something, and I might want to make something a little bit more elaborate. And I think that base one, that formula is really just, let's take a look. Let's figure out what this formula is actually doing, because that's probably not a bad question to start with as well. Crack Top Cat also says this is a naive take, but I feel like this requires a dynamic system. Is this assumption wrong? Because how the player will play depends on how the player plays, how a min-max plays. Yeah, so you're correct that we probably would want the simulator to potentially have different AI simulations for different types of players as well. So we'd probably want to do optimal as like an AI type that we would want to simulate against, but we probably also want something that's like semi-random, so it's people just picking things. You might also want like the cool factor AI, which is like choosing the ability that just feels the funnest. So like there probably would want to be something there where the AI that we choose to run with the player might want to be dynamic. Okay, so suboptimal player is probably a fair assessment. Yeah, you're correct in that statement. But I think that there's... You also could just have random button mash too as like a type. Okay, so if we had attack, let's take a look at what our attack values are. This is another thing that I might want to work on. We were working on this new... I mentioned this at the start, but we were working on a UI sequence editor to kind of improve our sequences. If we take a look at bridge crossing, we have this like sequence editor I was working off on in between the last weekend and this weekend, which is not done, but we might want to build a better way of modifying stats. In fact, let's show the way that we're currently modifying stats, which is over here, game data file. Okay, so currently we're modifying in a spreadsheet. I feel like I could make a better editor window that allows me to like have all of this information inside of the game, but for the time being, this works. So if we look at Ward's attack value is currently 11 for his melee attack. We do have two forms. We have magic attack and we have normal attack. Which one is which is kind of arbitrary based off the ability. If we look at monsters have different defenses, but they range between essentially like low defense, high defense, and we have different values. So certain monsters have higher magic defense and lower physical defense. So certain attacks should do more damage versus the mushroom. So if you do a physical attack, it'll do more damage than if you do a magic attack against the mushroom. We currently have an issue, I think, where all of our monsters are being represented by the monster sprite, just because I haven't got around to like importing all the other ones into the latest UI system or into the latest loading system. But regardless, these are kind of our base values. So we're going to drag these off camera for a second, or I guess technically we could just, oh, well, we closed everything. So let's bring chat back up. Stupid Windows. Didn't want to do that. Why would you think that's what I wanted? Okay, so there we are. Oh, we got a couple people hanging out and lurking in the background too. All right, so calculator. We take a look at game data. So if we say that Ward is doing a physical base attack, that's 11, right? We said that... Oh, look at unlockable characters go. Unlockable character has punched in the data. So we have 11 divided by, let's say 11 plus 13. So that's 24. And then we times that by 11. We get 5 damage. If we crank up Ward's attack value to say 22, then we would get 22 divided by, again, 13 defense. So that would be 35 divided by 35 times 11 gives us 6.9. So the difference there is like 5 versus 7. So bumping the attack by like 20 points is only a 2-point damage increase. If we drop the defense by a bit, so let's say it's 11 and divide that by, and let's say we'll drop it by a similar amount. Let's say that we go down to 3. We drop it by 10. So then the defense would be 11 plus 3 would be 14. And then we times that by 11. We do 8 damage. So by dropping the defense by 10 points, we all of a sudden do 3.5 more damage. These numbers are pretty small. And that's why we actually use the power value as well. That's no longer in here. That's now inside of the prefabs, which is also a problem, but it's fine. If we look at the attack prefab, we can see that that has a power of 40. So all those numbers we calculated would also get multiplied by 40. So the 5 is actually a lot bigger than we think, because that's getting multiplied by 40. So shouldn't we be doing... Well, that doesn't make sense, because that means we should be doing like 200 damage, and we're not. Oh, it's not. It's damage divided by 10 times power. So it would, so the first value, so we had 5 divided by 10 times 40 is 20 damage. Okay. And then if we do the highest value, which was like 8.5 divided by 10 times 40, that's 34 damage. So that's kind of where these numbers are coming from. Questions in chat. What do we got? Oh, I had closed the YouTube side of things. Hello, Trinity Heart and Tobias Random, if you're still here. Okay, so what do we got here? We've got, it really depends on the demographic of your game. When it comes to AAA games nowadays, it's a lot of appeal to the masses. I think that the golden age of gaming, like before 2015 or something, was full of people just making games that felt fun. It wasn't for everyone because the goal is for making the most make money. Sorry, my sentences are a bit scattered. Hopefully the points are maybe. Honestly, I'm not making it. I don't know. I'm making it because I enjoy making. I don't have a ton of opinions on that particular. So, and then unlockable characters says, okay, so your float is equal to attack plus defense. Not sure it's working that way. It does 20 to 26. I think we covered that. I'm just catching up. Again, I don't know what I'm talking about. Shouldn't you avoid 0 point something numbers, as those are called floating points? It feels like everything should always be natural numbers and making it round. We do that. So somewhere in here, we are rounding. Oh, because damage is an int, so we're actually truncating. So we are using float numbers in order to calculate everything, but the very last number that we always output is always going to be just a integer value. Understood and fair. Okay, so let's see. So that's roughly how we're calculating the damage. And that kind of shows that even though like this formula yields numbers that are fairly similar, based off the power of the ability will have a pretty huge impact on how much damage we actually do. I think this might be similar to like a Pokemon style damage formula. I don't know if that's a good thing or a bad thing though. Because I know that like Pokemon has like a base power system similar to this, I think. So these are numbers that we need to figure out. I don't know if I like this formula. I don't know if I like the way that we're calculating the power based off abilities. Like, I kind of think that's neat, especially because we have a really skill progression based system where skills are going to be really important. Going back to your original point, Cracktop, about the different types of AI we might want for different types of players. We might also want, like, right here we're seeing that like different types of attacks do different amounts of damage. In terms of like optimal play, we might want like a psychic AI also that's like, hey, what if I did the exact right type of attack with the exact type of defense matching to do the most optimal damage? That's something a player might not be able to do, but that's something we might want to also simulate against as well. Yeah, so your point, so you're saying yes. What I'm saying is it shouldn't you avoid floating points and truncating them? At least when I play some games that happens, it doesn't feel good. Maybe I'm not skilled enough to communicate the issue. I just feel like natural numbers in, natural numbers during computation, natural numbers from the output. I don't know how that's possible though. So you're somewhat right. It depends on the type of game, but if you think about like even like Pokemon as an example, your Pokemon might have a stat of like 64 attack, and you might have a power on that move of 50, but you don't really know, based off those numbers, you don't know the exact amount of damage you're going to do. You can calculate it, and I'm sure that some people can calculate it on the fly if they know the formulas, but like that you wouldn't really see that. It's not something that's noticeable, at least when your numbers are scaling a lot. If you're doing numbers that are very small, like 1 damage to 5 damage, then it is something you might notice more. But if it's more like tends to be the way that it tends to be in like our JRPGs is those numbers tend to be more varied. It might be like you do 20 to 30 damage, but why and exactly how much isn't something that you always care about, or at least it's not something I've always specifically cared about figuring out. Oh man, shots fired. Okay, so we're gonna check. Okay, so we've talked a little bit and given a bit of a brief understanding, which is for chat, but it's also just as much for me. I need to also figure out how all this stuff works because, again, I probably haven't touched this in a long time. That being said, I did work on a simulator a while back. I don't think I got super far. Battle Simulator. Oh, it's not as far back as I thought. In June, I did some work on a battle simulator. What did I do to make the battle simulator work in June? Interesting. Okay, so there is a version here that is functional. Can I resurrect this? This might take a few seconds. Do we want to change up the music? We've been listening to this one for a while. I like this one because it's of the scene category. So it tends to be more like cutscene-y, longer, less repetitive. What's this one here? That's kind of fun, but not necessarily what I want for the background. It's a bit dramatic. This one. Let's see how this one feels. That's pretty cool. All right. How do I resurrect this old code? So let's close Unity and the power of source control. Let's see if we can go back to this old version. This is going to be on an old version of Unity, so that might be a problem, but let's see. So go back to this branch. Oh, I need to commit my changes that we've made. Annoying. So what did we do? Oh, we went through all the sequence steps. That's fine. Let's just check all this in for now. I can revert if I have to later. Updated. Well, we have nothing on screen right now. This is not great. Let's just bring that back up for a second. Updated sequence steps to have a invoke results such that we can fast forward / skip a sequence but get the correct state at the end. Sure. Okay, then we're going to try and go back to my old simulator branch and see where we can get to with this. I need to update my Gitanor file. Oh my god. Why is everything just let me check out the thing. Also, how's chat? What are you guys talking about? What are you folks talking about? Words are hard. Oh, you're fighting. Cool. You continue to fight. we're just going to do that. Okay. Now we're going to come over here and we're going to update to Battle Sim branch. Oh, I shouldn't have done that while the project was open. Oh, that was really dumb. Oh, that was super dumb. We may have just pooched Unity. Moving too fast. What if we just what if we just end the process? What could possibly go wrong? We checked everything in, source control should be fine. Oh god, there was a lot of terminated processes. Okay, let's do... Oh, what did it do? Okay, it didn't do anything crazy. Just gonna discard all the changes. Good. That seems fine. We're okay. Okay, good. Okay, we're gonna try and open the project in the 2020 version of Unity as we're going back to an old branch. This might take a bit. Should have started this while we were doing the calculations of stuff. So while that's happening, so we have these stats. There's even a question of, do I like these stats specifically? I think I do. I like having a magic attack and an attack like separate stat. We're doing a skill tree system similar to like a Final Fantasy X spear grid. And so like a big part of the spear grid, if we bring that up over here under images, a big part of the spear grid is just stat nodes. It's a huge aspect of like just progressing the tree. So it's really important that we actually have a good number of stats. I don't know if we're going to allow you to move around the nodes like this, but yeah, they even have like accuracy and evasion. They have like even more advanced than what we have. So we're definitely going to want to at least attack and magic defense. Or attack and magic attack, defense and magic defense. It really is a question of that formula. If we like that power level formula where power plays such a huge part. I think the honest answer is that I probably need to do more research. If we do a search for damage formula... I've done this many, many times before. This is neat. This is actually like a how to create the formulas for like RPG Maker. Is state affected? Neat. Yeah. Reddit isn't necessarily always the most helpful. Hey, is this an explanation of damage formulas? Yeah, see, there's so many variety of ways that you can calculate damage. Attack plus 100 divided by 100 times 8, defense plus 8 equals attack. Like, just... attack times 2 of attack to the power of 2 divided by attack plus defense. There's just so many different ways that you can build that formula where you're just basically, you're creating a formula to get a value out from your attack stat and your defense stat. And I think at the end of the day, I just need to experiment. I don't want to find a damage formula. I want to like come up with something that's like unique. But I kind of do need to like see how they're built and understand what impacts they have. Oh, interesting. This is Final Fantasy X's damage formula. Stat to the power of 3 divided by 32 plus 32 times DM con divided by 16. Oh, and here's how it calculates out. So 127 to the power of 3 divided by 32 plus 32 times 16 divided by 16. What is DM? Damage constant. How does damage constant change? I would expect that to be a constant value. Oh, different commands have different DM constants. So that's almost like how we're equating power. Look up Final Fantasy Tactics damage formula. It's basically a book, says unlockable characters. Damage formula. Why can't I spell formula? Ah, because I'm dumb. Oh, this is just like the damage formulas for all Final Fantasies. Yeah, this one. Okay, I'm in the right spot. I'm just not sure if I'm looking at the right thing. Striking weapons. Bare hands is PA, which is physical attack, times brave, divided by 100 times PA. There's a separate system for crits. Damage modifiers. There's a crit section. There's a strengthen section. There's attack up. Oh, wow. Cracktop 13 or Cracktop Cat 13. It all depends on what you're trying to define fun as. Your damage should be fun, so what's most fun to you? I think it's, for me, the most fun for me is starting with a low value and slowly making your way up to a larger value. In most of the Final Fantasy games that I've really enjoyed, you often start by doing somewhat low numbers in that kind of 10 to 20 range, and as you progress through the game, you start to do 2, 3, 400 damage, and then near the end of the game, you're doing like 7,000 damage in the last couple hours, right? That's kind of like that's the kind of formula I'd like to try and get close to. Oh, Zodiac multipliers. Oh, this is how charge is. Oh, right, because every ability is going to be different too. So there's a different damage formula for each of the different abilities. And so these are the modifiers for jump. Wow, okay. Oh, did it finish loading? It did! Now, I'm in the combat scene. What is the current state of things? So this is an older version of the project, but it's where I had set up a bit of the simulator logic. What was in this branch? If we take a look at what was actually done in here, what did we do? So we modified the defend to take away the defend system. Okay, that makes sense. Probably was giving me difficulties. Okay, let's just drag this over. So if we take a look in here at the changes that was made, it looks like what I had done before was I had set up an add AI component to the player. That makes sense. I had to add an is harmful call to the abilities. I had to check whether or not something was an is item. I had to comment some code out around the elemental costing and around the elemental production. Okay, so when I built the simulator, it doesn't take into account... Oh, it's because it's having to contact the elemental manager. That makes sense. Oh, unlockable character says to check out how far down we can grow. We can scroll. Yeah, there's a lot. There's a lot in here. I believe you. This is probably good reference, as is probably the stat mechanics for Final Fantasy X. Leave it to GameFAQs to have it all laid out. So that's a good resource to reference when we're trying to come up with our own formula for things. Okay, so in here we added a space lull. We are no longer listening for stuff on audio. Okay. We're defining whether or not certain abilities are harmful. Oh, right. This is because when I was doing the AI driving for this, I needed... Oh, we're commenting out the allocation of the hit effects. Okay, that kind of makes sense. We don't want to show the hit UI. We have a because some status effects are good and some status effects are bad. That's why I created the is harmful system for this. And the player AI needed to know the difference. Specifically for like defend, realizing you need to target yourself with it. Get random unit. This is a simplified version of the steps to actually fire the ability. And then we modified some of the character management stuff. This is all pretty jumbled, but it looks like we modified some of how we do the targeting, probably again to support a AI player. Okay, so then if we come in here and take a look at this, is auto is checked. So if we run this, what happens? Okay. Switch that to that mode. So Flame Rat attacked Fala with fire. Ward attacked Flame Rat with focus attack. Fala attacked Flame Rat with attack. Flame Rat attacked Fala with fire. Fire Chonk attacked Ward with attack. Okay, so we go through all of this. So this is the result of the battle. This is where we had gotten to. Okay. So we're reviving this. We're trying to get this up and running again. And in terms of like questions, this is actually a really good one that I would love to track on a more global scale, is like, how many like actions did it take to get through a battle? This is currently 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, about 20. I would argue that it's not normally that much. I would argue that that doesn't feel right to me. I shouldn't say it's not normally that much, because again, it can be anything. Let's take a look at my channel, and let's go take a look. I've been wanting to get out of kind of game development land and do some more playing of the video games. I feel like that's something we need to just do in order to kind of get to understanding. So this is the Final Fantasy VIII playthrough from, when was this? 7 years ago. Jeez, time is dumb. Okay, so this is us playing through that. Let's mute this. Okay, random encounter. Single guy. We're going to do a draw action. Oh, I might just draw farming at this point. Super entertaining content, totally. Super entertaining. Actually, what's the more entertaining content? Me just drawing in the beginning of the battle, or me watching me play the game? Okay, so here it looks like we do a couple draws. This is where we start attacking. So it's one attack, 54 damage, 2 attacks, 41, 3 attacks, 48. Technically 5 attacks, 1 from the enemy. So approximately 5 attacks from the characters and 1 attack of the enemy. Each hero character doing between 40 and 50 damage. I don't know if I want to do director commentary, Cracktop, but that is an interesting idea for sure. So regardless, even at the start of the game when you are fairly underpowered, you're not taking that much. Let's see if we can find another battle. We're doing some equipping here. Okay, 3 enemies. Okay. We're going to spend some time drawing. When do we start attacking? Interesting. Okay, so we're not all in on stalking. We're spending some time casting it as well. It's fascinating. So it looked like 2 fire spills to kill the big one. Just counting. Okay. I would say it's probably about 20. Like, I know that I said this feels like too many, but this is why we reference gather. The 20 action feels like a lot here, and that might be something to do with the way our camera and stuff feels, but that was probably about 20 actions in here. Okay, so we've got 1 attack from the enemy. So we're doing a stalk, another stalk, another stalk. Okay, starting to attack. 2 attacks. 3, 4 attacks from the heroes. 6 attacks to kill a thing? Cracktop Cat asking, is there going to be some sort of grind in your game? Should it be some kind of objective? Maybe? Something I'm not 100% sure on. Again, that's part of what I want to figure out here. Where are we at? Okay, so... So this system of auto is mostly working. Is there anything in here that I did that was super hacky? Like, absolutely awful that I should not be doing? I want to just do a diff of this file real quick. Oh, can I not diff this file? Oh, okay, I'll have to manually try and read it here. This is just checking whether or not we're auto, and we've moved this chunk of code into here. We've removed this chunk of code in here and instead select AI. That's probably because we moved that chunk of code down. Yeah, this is this. Got rid of the animator. Yeah, it looks like I set up a new select AI move instead of doing some of it embedded in here. The get random target now passes in the ability because we need to calculate whether or not the ability is okay to be to target that enemy, because there's a bit more AI, and should target is checking whether or not the ability is harmful to the target and whether or not the thing we're attacking or targeting is we cannot change to Zelda music. I am currently looping through a bunch of RPG music that we have access to from the Unity Asset Store, so we can take a quick look at that. We've got piano music, battle music, dungeon music, town music, or scene music. Which of those categories would you like to hear? Cracktop, what would you like? If none of those appeal, I can also reject the channel points to give it back, but so this is a huge hack. This is a huge hack. I want to undo that. That's fine. That seems fine. Again, setting up all of that is okay. Here is not okay. Here we are turning off all the hit modifications. We don't like that. Okay. Is harmful is all fine. Here we're commenting out some code. Again, we don't like that. Okay. This actually isn't... I remember this being in a much more broken state, and I think it's partly because in general this isn't doing what I want. This is still running in engine. It's still like technically it requires the combat scene, it requires all the characters to be loaded, and it's just doing it very quickly with no delays is how it's killing everything and like performing all of the actions and ending the battle. It is calculating everything and doing all of the math to figure out, you know, what's happening and choosing different options, but it's still technically happening in this very rigid scene. I would like to figure out a way to pull all of this out so that I can like set up and tear down a bunch of these things all in code without having to actually have all of this UI and characters built. But I think for the first step, I think it's fine to just port this into the newest version of Unity and go from there. Dungeon is the request. We can take a look at Dungeon. For Dungeon, we have Enshrined, Filtered Dreams, Forest of Fairies, Frigid Pillars, Molten Gate, and Water Goddess Bassinet. This is all from Panman Music from the Unity Asset Store. I think it might just be the music I want. I'm probably going to use this as well as once we get a little closer to having a vertical slice, I'm probably going to reach out and see if I can get some pieces commissioned for some more specific scenes. But there was also some conversations about grinding and like, you know, having to fight a bunch in battles in order to, you know, make it further. Unlockable characters have one thing I like in the new retro JRPGs and remasters is the addition of the speed up toggle in battles for grinding, which is fair. Yeah, it's just a question of like, yeah, I probably don't want a crazy grind, but I will want there to be the ability to grind a little bit if you want. Okay, so we need to switch back over to the main branch that we were working off of at the top. Unity is closed this time. Yep. Let's see. Let's go with Forest of the Fairies. How's this one sound? It's kind of fun. How loud is that one, though? That one's pretty soft. We might be able to turn that one up a little bit. Oh, then the violin comes in. Trying to find a sweet spot. We'll go with there for the audio. Okay, cool. So switched up to the latest branch. We need to reopen the project in the latest version of Unity. Select this one, open in the latest version, change. Is it gonna have to re-import everything again? Hopefully not. Because that's gonna take a little bit one more time. So we need to somehow essentially build a combat scene that is identical to our current combat scene because we don't want any differences between the calculations. That's a really big aspect of this, is we really don't want to have any kind of changes in the amount of damage. If we calculate in our simulator that it should take 6 turns to kill the enemy from everyone just hitting attack, we want that to remain true. I mean, there will be variance in that, like, there can be a bit of randomness to the roll of how much damage you do, but we want it to at least be somewhat consistent to the real play experience. So we can't just like re-simulate. I think it's really important that I actually like simulate using the same code paths that we would normally do. The problem is a lot of the abilities are prefabs, and so in order to access them and to run them, we need to actually instantiate the prefabs. And that's a problem. That's a problem. The project is importing, by the way. This is a bit of a downtime, which is unfortunate because we had to, but I needed to go back to an old version of Unity to check that branch to see if that branch was even working before we brought it forward. I needed to test it in situ. Let's go back here for the time being and let's continue to look at some of this stuff and try and figure out how early battles in Final Fantasy VIII feels. They actually start with a fairly high health pool. 500. Yeah, we're carding the enemy. Can we see in the Learning the Ropes one, is this actually where we're fighting our way through the dungeon? I'm wondering if there's less drawing in this one. This honestly looks like a bunch of grinding. Another question from CracktopCat13. Another question I would like to ask is, why build your game in Unity? Why not some other standalone? That's an interesting one in that, like, mostly because of comfort. I've been working in Unity for 13 years now, professionally in the industry and in my own time. And it's just an engine that feels comfortable to me. I know how to do stuff in it very quickly. There's a good chance that we could have built up a lot of this logic in like something like RPG Maker in a lot less time. But Unity allows me to have more control and allows me to do more than what we currently can. Okay, what are we doing with these bats? Okay, single attack. Okay, attack from the heroes. One hit kill. Attack from the heroes, one hit kill. So these initial bat things are dying relatively quickly. Skip forward, skip forward. Okay, 4 enemies versus 2 heroes. Action economy is not on our side. We got some dialogue. Cool. Bat goes first for 4 damage. Oh, perform a GF immediately to just clear out all 4. Okay. AoE is really important in some of these spots. Another attack from the bats. So the bats have actually a fairly high speed, but a really low amount of damage. Unlockable character says, I believe RPG Maker Unity is coming out soon. Best thing about RPG Maker is the database UI. I have not heard about that. That's interesting. Again, we're 2.5 years into the project at this point. I don't imagine that I would want to switch engines. I'm pretty set where I am, but that's also interesting to note. Okay, we've got one big enemy. Single attack from one character, 50 damage. 43 damage. 2 hits to kill, enemy didn't get a chance to attack. Okay. And then we're going to get the big boss. If we go to this video, this is midway through. This is where we're getting into some battles with some enemies. Single humanoid soldier. Goes first, attacks for 12. Attacks again for 11 before we get a chance to do anything. 56, 100 with a crit. 150 health to kill. Okay. Fair. Yeah, I didn't necessarily think you were suggesting switching unlockable characters, but I just wanted to make the statement in response just in case. Okay, what do we got here? We've got enemy. Okay, more dialogue. 67 damage. That's a lot more than we've seen from a lot of the other enemies. Attacks again. So this is the thing, though, is this is what makes Final Fantasy not a great reference, is we're trying to make something that's turn-based, and this is using the ATB system, which means that you can have enemies kind of performing actions out of turn, which changes a bit of the dynamic as well. Okay. So what was that? This is taking like maybe 6 hits? I think we're at about 6, and he's hit 3 or 4 times. Is this a mini boss? I don't feel like this is a mini boss, but maybe it is. Scan. Past me also had a similar feeling. Oh, neat. Yeah, okay. 1,000 health. Weak to ice. Strong versus fire. Okay. And a rough estimation of the stats at the top. Strength, defense, int, spirit, dex. Weird. Okay. Yeah, so approximately each hit is doing 50 damage, and the enemy has 1,100 health. So we're still just loading up. It's going to take a little bit. So it's like 22 hits, and the enemy is attacking in there as well. So this battle is actually going to probably be like 30, 35 actions before we get to the end, and we have some GFs in here. Okay, so that might actually reduce this a fair amount. How many actions is the GF? Again, each action is about 50 damage we're seeing in here. $866. So the GF, because of weakness as well, was equivalent to 17 basic attacks. Hey, Unity opened, and the whole thing's busted. Cool. Cool, cool, cool. This is the combat scene? This is because the environmental texture has the wrong shader. I believe you're supposed to be using shader graph. Oh, why don't I see shader graph? What did we do? How did we mess this up? Nope. Oh. There's some base errors with the metadata files. Interesting. It didn't like going back and forth. We're going to close and reopen and see if that helps. Let's double check to see if there's any changes that don't look right. Nothing out of the ordinary. Let's just reopen the project. No, it's still saying that we're opening with errors. Huh. We were not having this problem before. It looks like our package cache is corrupt. That's probably because we closed the application while it was mid doing stuff, and now it's just mad. We might be done for this evening. Yeah, I have to regenerate all these files. Yeah, it's because I ended the application incorrectly. It's in a bad state now. Alright. I'm going to try reopening it one more time after deleting the package cache, but it might take a little bit more time to load back up again. Okay, here's a little battle with enemies while we try and figure that out. What state is it in? It's resolving packages. Okay. Single attack. 100 damage to kill the enemy. Alright. See, once again, like, these enemies are... Like, this is the attrition thing I was trying to describe earlier. Is that, like, these enemies didn't do anything. They did 0 damage to the party. There was no threat at any point to them dying. But if they happened to go first and attack before they got a chance to, there's a chance that, like, things could have gone badly and taken a little bit of damage. And that little bit of damage adds up over time. Looks like this is all about drawing and card battles. This is more story. Looking for combat. Show me combat. This is all story. I see combat here. Okay, what are we doing here? A little further into the game at this point. Where do we load in? I would like to see how many attacks it takes. Okay, so we're loading in. Super cool camera movements. Totally want to do stuff similar to this eventually, but with 2D sprites. So 17 damage from the enemy. Another 16. So on average, it's doing about 15 damage. 15 to 20, we can say. We're doing a couple draws. I'm kind of skipping past this because it doesn't feel like attacks. So 3 attacks from the enemies, 4 attacks from the enemies. But at the same time, it's like part of the game mechanically. It's like actions you have to take. So that was a crit for 195. That was 5 attacks from the enemies, I think. Okay. 7 attacks from the enemies, and it took 4 to kill. 8 attacks from the enemies. Performing a cure. Doing another draw. Okay. It's like 9? I may have lost track. Doing more draws. Okay, we're drawing. Enemies hitting. We're curing to stay alive, but mostly just drawing all the sleeps that we can. Okay, yep, that's fair. Scanning information. Excellent. 300 health. Okay. We know that on average the characters are doing about 50 damage, but it looks like because he's weak to fire and I probably equipped Squall's sword with fire element, he's doing 200. So it's like 3 hits from... 1 from Squall, 2 from the other character, or 2 hits from Squall to kill them. Meanwhile, the enemy's doing about 15 damage per hit and is hitting like 2 or 3 times before each character hits. And the heroes look to have about 500, so they can take like 33 hits before they need to really heal. Approximately 30. Missed a bit of chat. Yep, that's fair. FFA is a bit different from its battle system because random battles are are attrition, but also the opportunity to draw spells of the enemies to make yourself stronger. It's also a game that punishes you for battling as the enemies level with you. Yep, fair. All from unlockable character from Cracktop Cat. It's also food for thought after a few generations of a CPU. It is specialized that it is the best to start from the ground up because you optimize in subsystems so far. You can't optimize the system as a whole, something like that. I'm not entirely sure. Yeah, what is that in reference to? I'm sure that's out of context. Okay. Is it still opening broken? It is still opening broken. We're gonna have to delete more files. Okay, we'll delete the package cache. At this point, we might just need to delete the entire library. And maybe packages. We know that this worked before, so the problems with Unity being broken is to do with the temp files. So I should be able to delete some of these files and reopen things. Ah, gotcha. I see. On board, you on board. Cool. Good talk, folks. So we're gonna reopen Unity one more time, but I think this is gonna take forever because I had to delete all of our temp files, and Unity's gonna have to regenerate everything based off the project. So this might actually take a fair amount of time as it has to re-import everything. Long story short on this front, just to kind of come to some conclusions here, you're right that there is like the aspect to draw in here, and maybe we should take a look at some other Final Fantasy games. Me and Drixie have been playing through Final Fantasy IV. Haven't had any time in the last few weeks, but this is definitely something I'm going to take a look at when we play again. It's just the battle systems, but Final Fantasy VIII may not be a great reference here because of the draw system. It kind of throws off some of the action economy. But in general, we are seeing that in a battle of this game, it's not one or two battles. It's like, oh, this is a must-run situation too, which is interesting. Yeah, gotta run. Oh, we're trying to card. We're fighting it. Interesting. What was its stat points? Yeah, a lot. It has a lot of stats. I remember this guy being brutal. Why are we fighting it? Is it to try and card it? I mean, we're killing it slowly. Interesting. But the action economy here is still somewhere in like the 20 to 30 range of actions, it feels like. And that's funny because when we were testing the simulator, the battles that we're simulating right now are taking about 20 actions. So it's actually not that far off from this, but this feels snappier. I think our battle system just doesn't feel as interesting, and part of that's animations, I think, but really, Unity is opening almost instantaneously, but it's still opening with errors. Yeah, it might take me a while to figure out what's gone wrong here. I might even need to resync the project. I should be able to just delete the library folder and have it rebuild, though. Interesting that that's not working. Huh. I don't want to end the stream, but I think we're at a point where there's not much of an other impasse. I've broken Unity, and I'm going to have to call it here, I think. This was a fun chat, though. We had some good conversations. And again, in terms of like just getting my head in a space, I think we're on track. Let's finish that thought, though. So we're seeing here that the amount of actions that these battles are taking are significantly more than what we are seeing in our combat. So what is it that makes our combat feel so much more different? There's also a question, have I played Kenshi? No, this does not look familiar to me. I have not played that. So camera movements are more dynamic in here. That's definitely a big part of it. The particles, the animations with the camera, that's all more dynamic. There's also the animations themselves. Our characters kind of flash gray and then the attack goes off and then the other enemy flashes gray and they get hit. There's not like a hit and attack animation here. And like that sequence of like playing those animations is some of what makes it interesting. Like that burst and the enemy flinching and like roaring back up is part of the fun, I think. That could be part of it. Okay. Definitely some food for thought. I think at a base level, I still want to try and get the simulator running. That's still the first problem I'd like to try and solve. If we can bring this project in, I'd like to bring this in and I'd like to clean up all the spots where we're just commenting out code like this and instead have like an if check on whether or not we're in auto mode. And if we're in auto mode, then we just ignore some of this stuff. That'll at least get us close on some of it. But I do want to build this simulator to be more robust in the long term, in that I would love to be able to simulate multiple battles, not just one. But that's going to require some major refactor of some systems. Yeah. But there is a general problem to solve, which is that when we look at this battle here, this battle, I feel like is approximately 6 attacks from the player characters, and it looks like the enemies get in about 10 or so. And so that's about 16 actions, and it doesn't feel that slow, and I think some of that has to do with visual interest. But I don't know. That I want to work on the simulator, try and get our actions and stuff feeling somewhat correct, and then we can kind of more closely tune and figure stuff out after that. Yeah. Yeah, no, it's not going to load. Okay, cool. We're going to call it here. We'll be back again tomorrow. I'm not sure when, but I'll be streaming again tomorrow. We'll probably continue where we left off here, working on trying to figure out the damage formulas, probably doing some references. Maybe tomorrow I should play something that isn't... Maybe I should play something as we try and figure this out, and then we can talk through some battle mechanics. What would be a good game to play in the JRPG genre? I don't know. I'll figure it out. Anyways, thanks for those who hung out. Appreciate the lurkers. Appreciate the chatters. For now, though, this will be Tolhi signing out. Later, folks.